This is our 7th meeting in this fashion. We get together on Facebook as Take Back Elections, Facebook, and we have a new website, which is another way for folks to learn about us and engage with us in the comments and etc. that you'll find on our website, takebackelections.org. And so we know there's a lot of problems to fix in this election process. So we would like to kind of just get started by introducing just briefly who we are at Take Back Elections. And the topics we'll be focusing on tonight is gerrymandering, essentially. And so thanks everyone for being here. And thank you also for all your hard work from, all across the nation, wherever you're calling in from, and joining us in your commitment to democracy, a democratic republic, and our election process. And a special thanks to our Take Back Elections folks. I know they've been working very hard to bring us, as I mentioned, this comprehensive, really very sweeping, unified reform for all 50 states that would be as constitutional.
Larry.
These would be as constitutional amendments, and they would be state by state, through the ballot initiative process and through friendly legislators. Ultimately, with the change that this will produce, we believe at that point we can then get this passed through federal in DC for a constitutional amendment to our federal constitution. So I just want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Monta Welch. I have been a lifelong activist, but I started more in earnest about 10 years ago, focusing primarily on environmental and climate issues, recognizing those as foundational parts of the whole. I have founded several organizations related to these and the broader picture. And during all of this, I learned how to work at all levels of government, successfully build coalitions, change local dynamics in my own hometown, and locale. And also I've helped work on and guide successful state ballot initiatives and other policy. So the work with the different organizations I started continues to bear fruit today, locally, statewide, even nationally, on racial, social, cultural, economic, and environmental justice issues. And after, like many of us here, seeing the depth of our problems with elections after especially Arizona blew up in the presidential primary, I began writing sweeping, comprehensive 50-state unified solutions. And I've worked with a handful of people during that period of time, which was maybe about 9 months or so, maybe a little less, somewhere in there. And then eventually we started bringing that to a broader voice through, as I mentioned earlier, our Take Back Elections Facebook group initially, and we also have ways you can engage with us at takebackelections.org on the website. And so what we've been doing is researching, revising language, fleshing it out, vetting different people's opinions and thoughts, sharing ideas and moving forward, continuing to move forward a plan that we will continue at different stages along the way to vet, engage, and approve of as, a kind of a consensus with our group. And so we have a lot of committed people getting on daily, and we want to welcome any of you to join our work. Today, I'd like to just go ahead and mention that we do have these frequent online meetings, conference calls. They're on Tuesdays, and sometimes they're bi-weekly. Sometimes they're usually several Tuesdays out of a month. So that's another way you can engage with us as well. Keep your eye out for those calls. So really with deep appreciation and sincerity to everyone who's joining us, thank you and welcome. And I'll introduce momentarily, after some housekeeping notes, our two guests, which we're very happy to have going to speak to us on gerrymandering. So the meeting goes well, and you know how to engage in the meeting. If you're joining us online, you can hover your mouse across the bottom of your screen and you'll see a chat. And there are other ways that you can engage. You can raise your hand. We will mute people while the presentations are going on, and we will unmute. So for questions and answers, either individually or collectively, if we have quiet backgrounds, so we can have a good conversation. And so there are ways that we'll manage the meeting in that way. And for the callers, if we can't, you can find the visual parts of our meeting, because there will be a PowerPoint type presentation. And so those things you can find on our website as we archive these meetings. And so you can engage later on in that layer as well. But for everyone else, there's the chat and the video part of our meeting. So I would like to start out to thank both of our guests, Winston Apple, who's going to be talking about proportional representation, and Jim Mueller on his choice of representation model. So they will each give us a presentation, and I'll start first with Winston Apple. And Winston is a political activist, the founder and principal spokesperson for Government by the People, a nonpartisan political action committee that promotes ballot initiatives. He was elected to the Democratic National Committee in June of 2016 and to the State Committee of the Missouri Democratic Party in November of 2016. He is a retired teacher, government and economics, and the author of Edutopia, a manifesto for the reform of public education. He is also a singer-songwriter who just released his 16th album and was inducted into the Kansas Music Hall of Fame in 2015. And so I would like to ask Winston to take the floor for us and tell us what he's working on in this area to help with gerrymandering. And he does have a screen share. And I will say that we're nonpartisan as well. So thank you for your work, Winston.
Thank you for doing this and for your introduction as well. And it'll take just a click or two here, I think, to get this.
Looks good.
Sees it good?
Yes. No.
Okay.
Yes.
And that is our website, governmentbythepeople.org, and our brand new logo redone over the weekend by our newly hired graphic design person. So thanks to Susan Powell for the logo. And we are focused on ballot initiatives in the 24 states that have that process. And it's a very, very powerful form of direct democracy. And so the question here is, what is wrong with our current system of government? We all, I think, agree that it's broken. Much has been made of the fact that the two major party presidential candidates in last year's election had disapproval ratings far above 50%. And President Trump's approval rating has continued to fall after the less than spectacular start to his presidency. Although I will say, to some people, he's doing a great job, apparently to about 35 to 36% of the people, which is where his approval rating is. And that sounds pretty low, but it is still 2 to 3 times higher than the approval rating for Congress, which averages about 11%, anywhere between 9 and 14%, depending on whose poll you're looking at. And yet, despite this abysmal approval rating, 96.4% of incumbents who run for re-election win their election, win re-election. Why? Well, there are 4 primary reasons for this deplorable state of affairs. A winner-take-all system combined with single winner districts inevitably leads to distortions in representation. The supporters of the losing party are not represented. Gerrymandering gets a lot of the blame, and it certainly makes matters worse. District lines are drawn not only to favor one party over the other, but also to protect incumbents from both major parties. Combined with the winner-take-all system, gerrymandering leads to the distortions in the will of the voters and legislative bodies that we'll be talking about. The fact that it takes enormous amounts of money adds a catch-22 of sorts. Since incumbents are so likely to win, it's hard to raise the money necessary to challenge an incumbent. Nobody wants to give money to a candidate who has no realistic chance of winning. I will add, nobody likes to volunteer much time for a candidate with no chance of winning. Even people who like and support a candidate challenging an incumbent hesitate to give money or time to a candidate with no chance of winning. Money was a problem before Citizens United. That ruling has made it even more of a problem. And one final nail in the coffin for challengers is the media focus on polling and on reporting how much money each candidate has raised, instead of supporting and promoting a serious discussion of critical issues. Proportional representation is a voting system where political parties are awarded seats in a legislature based on the percentage or proportion of the vote they receive. Although proportional representation takes slightly different forms, that's the basic requirement for a system to accurately be referred to as proportional representation. The combined effects of gerrymandering and a winner-take-all system are evident in my home state of Missouri. Of course, they're evident elsewhere as well. Contrary to popular perception, we are not a red state. In fact, I would argue there are no red states and blue states. And if we were accurately represented, we would see 50 shades of purple. And we are about as purple as a state can get. Our statewide elections are almost always close. Even in the midst of last year's disastrous results here in Missouri, the Koster-Greitens race was close, and the Kander-Blunt race was even closer. And in recent elections prior to last November, the Democratic Party on average won 8 out of 10 statewide elections. Yet we consistently send 6 Republicans and 2 Democrats to represent our state in the U.S. House of Representatives, and the Republican Party has a supermajority in both houses of the General Assembly. In last year's election, as a result of people feeling they had no chance to win, there was no Democratic candidate on the ballot in 69 of 163 House races. There was no Republican on the ballot in 29 House races. There were 78 House races with only 1 candidate, not even a Libertarian, Green, or Independent. Only 7 competitive House races out of 163 where the result was less than 10%. But this hurts the Democratic Party. My party is unfortunate that it disenfranchises voters and undermines democracy is tragic. It's bad here in Missouri, if, as it said on a previous slide, if you're a Republican living in the 1st or 5th district, St. Louis or Kansas City, you're effectively disenfranchised. If you're a Democrat living anywhere else in the state, you're effectively disenfranchised. With proportional representation, let me just add before I go on, I know we have a caller, we said from Massachusetts. Gerrymandering generally favors the Republicans, but it's hardly universal. In Massachusetts, 40% of the electorate is Republican. They have 9 seats in the U.S. House. Every seat is held by the Democratic Party at this time. With proportional representation, there are multiple winners in each state or district. If there are no districts, if it's statewide as opposed to a single winner. The effectiveness of proportional representation increases with larger districts and with a greater number of representatives to be elected from each. Proportional representation is based on the principle that all voters deserve representation and that all political groups in society deserve to be represented in our legislatures in proportion to their relative strength in the electorate. Like-minded voters should be able to elect representatives in proportion to their number. This is a vast improvement over a winner-take-all system. Proportional representation is not an untested system. It is, in fact, the norm among democratic governments around the world. 94 countries have some form of proportional representation. 85 of those use the ordered party list system, that we are proposing. Political scientists agree that proportional representation is a more genuinely democratic and much better means of electing legislatures than our winner-take-all system, and their opinions are based on observations of working systems. Proportional representation is not a new idea either. One of our founding fathers, John Adams, who went on to become our second president, favored proportional representation. He said this in his Thoughts on Government, which he published in 1776. The principal difficulty lies and the greatest care should be employed in constituting this representative assembly. It should be in miniature an exact portrait of the people at large. It should think, feel, reason, and act like them. That it may be in the interest of the assembly to do strict justice at all times, it should be an equal representation, or in other words, equal interest among the people should have equal interest in it. Great care should be taken to effect this and to prevent unfair, partial, and corrupt elections. James Wilson was one of the delegates to the Federal Convention where the Constitution was drafted. He and several other delegates also spoke in support of proportional representation. And Wilson said, the portrait is excellent in proportion to it being a good likeness. The legislature ought to be the most exact transcript of the whole society, the faithful echo of the voices of the people. The proposal that Government by the People is putting forward in Missouri calls for all 8 of our members to the U.S. House to be elected statewide. In the primary election, you would vote for your favorite candidate to help him or her win a place on the party's ordered list. You would vote, of course, in one party's primary only, and you would vote for a single candidate. In the general election, you would vote for a party, presumably the one whose primary you voted in, and for its ordered list. Had this system been in place in 2016, we would be sending 4 Democrats instead of 2 to the U.S. House. There are 7 states with the initiative process where this could make a big difference for the Democrats. There are also many states like Massachusetts, which is not alone, where the difference would favor the Republicans. Our proposal for the Missouri General Assembly is that there would be 10 members of the General Assembly elected from each congressional district. That reduces the size of the General Assembly from 163 to 80, saving the taxpayer somewhere between $5 and $8 million a year in the process. Senators would be elected statewide at large. We have a 34-member Senate with 17 elected every 2 years. So with 17 elected statewide, the threshold to win a seat is just under 6%, 5.88%. In last year's election, there would have been a Libertarian candidate elected to the Missouri Senate, and that's without the added benefit, as we'll talk about, with the spoiler effect and wasted votes no longer depressing support for third-party and independent candidates. The vote totals from the primary are again used to construct ordered lists for each party for the general election, and in the general election you would vote for a party and its ordered list. Proportional representation is a system that improves the quality of our elections and leads to legislatures that are more genuinely representative of the electorate. So let's consider the overall benefits. More genuinely democratic, partisan differences are not distorted. It simultaneously makes parties and their platforms more important while also breaking the stranglehold of our 2 major parties. There are more seats for women and minorities. And again, this is demonstrated through hundreds of years of experience. This isn't theory or conjecture. Gerrymandering is eliminated. There are other ways to try to temper the effects of gerrymandering to make it a little less egregious, but proportional representation eliminates gerrymandering. I will add that ranked choice voting in multi-winner districts can also largely eliminate gerrymandering. Research indicates you need to be electing at least 5 members from each district to mute the effects of gerrymandering. And the more members you elect from each district, the easier it is for third-party and independent candidates to have a voice in governing. And even though I am a Democratic National Committee member and a Democrat myself, I believe it's very important that we start getting rid of the wasted votes, the idea of spoiler candidates. And I believe third-party and independent candidates should have seats in legislatures representing whatever percentage of the voters truly favor that party. With the focus shifting to party and their ordered list in general elections, attack ads are essentially pointless. I'm sure we'd see some ads attacking the parties in general, but that would have to be on the basis of the issues. That reduces the need for money, and in the general election, the focus would inevitably switch and focus on issues. And I believe that's the healthiest thing we could do for our democracy. Also, it's very clear in countries that have proportional representation, voter participation is at significantly higher levels. So that's the basic overview of what Government by the People is proposing here in Missouri. As I mentioned before, we are a political action committee that's focused exclusively on promoting ballot initiatives. At this point, we are largely located in Missouri, but we are eager to form chapters in the 23 other states that have the initiative process. And we believe that Robert La Follette had it right a long time ago when he said that if the people want a government of their own, they must do the work of making it their own. And right now, there's no more constructive, no positive, more positive work that could be done than to gather signatures to get some true reform items on the ballot and passed in 2018. The system as it exists is very resistant to change because it comes down to, in most cases, the people who have been elected through the present system to reform the system. And since even those in the minority party are winning within the present system and the incumbents are safe, they're not eager to change the system. But we, the people, in 24 states can get the ball rolling. And as Monta mentioned earlier, if we get the ball rolling in these states, it may very well spread out to states where we have friendly legislators. And ultimately, this will go to Congress. I believe that Monta is absolutely correct about that. And so my advice to all of us who are worried, nervous, frightened, angry, concerned at this point is to keep calm and gather signatures. The petitions that we have submitted in Missouri should be approved for circulation the second week of May, probably no later than May 15th. And if anyone is interested in joining our campaign, simply go to our website, Government by the People. You can click on Join the Campaign, and there's a form. You fill in as much information as you care to provide, and we will be in touch with you. At the website, you can also, here in Missouri, there are PDFs of the petitions. We've got 5 that we're circulating already on other issues. As soon as the proportional representation petitions are approved for circulation, you'll be able to print copies from home or from a printer nearby, along with instructions for circulating petitions. We have informational and promotional materials available. Within a few days, we'll have t-shirts available for those who like to wear their passions on their chest. So that concludes my presentation, and I will stop sharing.
On proportional representation for Missouri, and I think it was a good explanation. I personally have some questions and others might, so if you want to raise your hand or ask Gary some questions, I think it was a great presentation. I wanted to understand better how your version is different from the ones you are aware of, and this parties ordered list part of it, just to kind of start some questions. I know you said in the primary, you vote for the person in the party that you're voting for in the primary. And then apparently the party has an ordered list. How does that person you voted for in the primary, this is the part that confuses me a little bit. I'm not sure if everyone else understands.
Well, in the primary election, you would have a much broader range of candidates to choose from. Here in Missouri, as I mentioned in part of the presentation, we have huge parts of the state where there is no primary. There's not even a single candidate for one or the other party that runs in the primary. And in many more primaries, there's only a single candidate. It's actually fairly rare to have a contested primary. And so voters really have very little say in who the candidates are going to be. And so at best, you come down to a choice of 1, 2, or 3 candidates, largely picked by somebody else, depending on where you live in the state. So imagine, first of all, in the primary election, you don't have only 1 or 2 candidates to pick from, or none at all. I would anticipate with the 10 seats in the Missouri House elected from each congressional district, you'd see at least 10, 15, 20 candidates on the ballot. And you would pick the one that you like the best and vote for her or for him. Now, then you simply tabulate the primary results. And the candidate with the most votes is listed first on the list. The candidate with the second most vote is listed second, with the third most third, all the way down to however many seats there are to be filled. That would be 8 in the case of the U.S. House, 17 in the case of the Senate, and 10 in the case of the Missouri House. And then in the general, you vote for that list. If you are, and the best way to explain this really is an analogy. I'm a big baseball fan, and even if you're not, you probably get this level of understanding. We're going to ignore the pitchers for a moment. Well, in fact, let's go to Massachusetts and we'll have a pitcher involved too. Massachusetts has 9 congressional districts. Now let's imagine that you are going to pick the best team possible. You're the general manager of the team. Would you prefer to pick the 9 best players? They all have to live in Massachusetts, by the way, for our illustration to work. But from all the people that live in Massachusetts, you want to put together the best team you can. Would you rather pick the 9 best candidates for the team, regardless of where they live, or would you prefer to be limited to a single player from each of the 9 congressional districts to make up your team? You don't have to be a baseball fan to realize you're going to have a much better team if you can disregard districts and simply pick the best player from each one. And so basically each party would put together its team, the 9 best Democrats for the U.S. House, the 9 best Republicans for the U.S. House from Massachusetts. And then the voters decide in November which team they would like to see hold most of the seats. And in the case of Massachusetts, my party, the Democratic Party, would lose a few seats, but the people of Massachusetts would benefit from having a truly representative team, with 40% of the electorate who vote Republican not being completely unrepresented, no players on the team. If you know, in Little League All-Star games, even in the Major League All-Star games, every team gets at least 1 player. With proportional representation, it's a whole lot more likely that we get a player from the Green team or the Libertarian team or a independent ball player to fill out the lineup. So I hope that helps.
That does help. I will say that Take Back Elections has a kind of a vision so far anyway, and we're working on this, so nothing's in stone with us right now, but of everyone just being able to run in a primary or just in general, and that it wouldn't necessarily have like a party, you know, someone, it's just about however many people you need to elect, and they don't really have a party, so there wouldn't be a party slate. It would just be, as you mentioned before, the top people, but out of a primary. And it might be Democrats or Greens or people with no parties. It could be anything.
Right.
But we can talk about that a little bit more later. I know Marcia Everett has her hand raised to ask a question or make a comment. Marcia, I'm sorry. Can you unmute Adria or Marcia?
I think I am unmuted.
Oh, perfect.
And I think you just stole my thunder. That's what I was going to ask about. There are people who are not in parties or don't want to be in a party. If the public just wants to elect somebody that they like in their neighborhood that they know, I don't see how they are represented or they will have as much opportunity to be voted for and to make the level of votes needed to be in that, to be put on the to be a representative. The other thing is, I also don't think that the citizens should pay for primaries for all these different parties. I think these parties should pay for their primaries privately, and I don't know why we are working on ways to hold primaries for all these different parties. I think that they're private parties, and so that part would be a concern for me. But I don't want to take up a lot of time because
well, Jim's coming on and we want your comments on that too, definitely.
Well, let me, if I can respond very briefly. I think you're both nonpartisan. Of course, George Washington warned us about the dangers of faction. And I think those dangers are greatly highlighted when you're limited to two choices. Those are two very big tents without a lot of room to discern the finer points of a candidate's strengths or weaknesses. Independent voters are typically now listed as about 42%. And yet a truly independent candidate winning a seat in a legislature is extremely rare. The only independent we've had recently in Missouri was elected as a Democrat and then switched to be an independent. No one's been elected, as far as I know, recently as an independent. And that's where proportional really shines. Because if 42% of the people, and if you add in third parties, you're getting close to half the people do not want to vote for a Democrat or a Republican. Both major parties are held in very low esteem by a very high percentage of the voters these days. And if our Congress and our state legislatures actually reflected that, we would have a lot of independents, a lot of Green Party members, a lot of Libertarian candidates, and Constitution Party and other parties. As I mentioned with my proposal that Government by the People is working on or will be working on here in Missouri, for the Missouri Senate, the threshold is very low, 5.88%. If you round up 5.88% of the vote, you're a state senator. That's opening the door pretty nicely for nonpartisan and independent candidates.
Well, I think something about, I don't think I described what we have in mind all that well, because in a primary, people do think about just the parties choosing their individual candidates. And we kind of expand the concept to where it's a bit of like what you were saying, people electing a slate basically from across the range of parties. Maybe you might have, you would have to decide on what percentage you cull out in a primary. That we haven't figured out or decided completely on all of the details of it. But it would basically be anyone who wants to run, and we have a solution for the money, so money isn't going to be an issue. We have publicly funded. But then these individuals could run, and we would need to see how many ran. Obviously, we need enough people to ultimately fill the seats, but hopefully there'll be many more than that running, so we would have to decide in a primary how many then move to a general out of that. So like whatever top half of the vote getters or something, I'm not sure what formula it would use, but it wouldn't be really like only a party putting forth their person or their slate particularly. It would be really based on the individuals.
And Monta, if I could respond to that, I think that the system that I've proposed that we will be promoting here in Missouri, and I hope in other states, if you have a large number of independent candidates run, what you've described happens. In the general election, if you've got 17 or more, or let's say in the U.S. House, if you've got 8 or more strong independent candidates running, and enough people prefer them over the party's choices, you could send all 8 seats could go to independents from a state, particularly in some of the smaller states, maybe even the larger states. I mean, the percentages would change. But imagine, I mean, I can tell you one objection to your system would be, and I'm not one of these people, I'm not a party first person. I want good government. I want something done about the climate issue. I want full employment at a living wage and affordable health care for everybody. And if the Three Dog Night Party can get that for us, I'll become a member of the Three Dog Night Party. But some people are very committed and strongly associate with parties and feel very passionately about those parties. With this system that we're proposing, they still have that option, but you and Marcia have the option of saying, we don't want someone from a party, we want an independent. And whatever percentage of the vote agrees with you, that percentage of the vote would go to truly independent, nonpartisan candidates. Everyone is reflected, everyone's will is reflected in terms of the numbers of people that agree with them. Truly proportional, genuinely democratic legislatures.
I'm going to study your plan a little more because I did look it over on the website, and one of the reasons I wanted to invite you, and I'd love to take anyone else's questions or comments, and we can think about what we're hearing. And I did have one more question in a minute, but I want to see if anyone else has a question, callers or George Ripley has just raised his hand with a question. If Adria or yourself can unmute.
This is Paul. Can you hear me?
Yes, Paul. George, would you mind if Paul goes ahead? He can't see what's going on here, and
okay.
And then you'll be next. Go ahead, Paul.
Yes. So I'm the one from Western Massachusetts, and I'm actually involved in an effort here to put an initiative on the ballot for ranked choice voting. And it sounds like you think that that would be a natural hand in hand with the proportional representation that you're talking about.
Yes, we have a proposal for ranked choice voting for statewide elections where there's only a single winner. And I don't know if you've worked with Fair Vote, but we use their model for that. I also have a petition that's been approved for ranked choice voting from multi-winner districts. And we're still sort of weighing the feedback as to whether we want true proportional or ranked choice voting from multi-winner districts. But the tide is turning in favor of proportional based on people talking to.
Well, could you elucidate, or could you give a short explanation of how those would differ then? I was listening, but it wasn't clear to me that what the nuances would be.
Sure. The big nuance is that you don't vote for a party in the general. You're still voting for a candidate. As long as you have at least 5 winners from a multi-winner district with ranked choice voting, you do pretty much eliminate the effects of gerrymandering. I was at a workshop here in Kansas City. Fortunately, they came right to my hometown for this. And it was the national leaders of a lot of groups like Fair Vote and Represent Us. And the 2 people who ran the campaign in Maine last year for ranked choice voting were in attendance and served on a panel. And they said they came up with a clever and enjoyable way to explain ranked choice voting. They had beer tastings in pubs that served craft beers. And everyone sampled the beers. They nominated 10 or 15 of the more famous beers were nominated. Then each person filled out a ballot, their first 5 choices, first choice down to, they tabulated the results showing ranked choice voting. And the way it works is very simple. For proportional, the system that I've proposed, you take the total votes cast and you divide by the number of seats to be awarded, and then you round that number down. You have to actually have that many seats to, you know, like if there's 100 votes and 10 seats, you need 10 votes for each seat. I'm trying to give you small numbers here. If you have more than 10 votes, then that becomes a surplus vote. So you award all the seats based on who's got as many as you need at a minimum. And then if you have 1 or 2, 3 seats left to be awarded, they go in order, whoever has the most surplus votes. With ranked choice voting, the best way to illustrate it is if we use last year's presidential race. If we'd have had ranked choice voting, everyone lists their first, second, third, fourth, fifth choice. Now, you don't have to list any choices you don't want, and I know there were lots of fringe candidates. We'll even throw Evan McCullough in. You had Evan McCullough, Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton. So everybody votes, and maybe one of us puts Jill Stein down as our first choice, Hillary Clinton is our third choice, and Hillary is our second, Gary Johnson is our third. And we don't vote for the others. So all the first place votes are counted. Evan McCullough came in last. He drops out. All the voters who voted for him have their second choice votes distributed among the remaining candidates. Still no one has a majority. You drop out Jill Stein. All the people who voted for her as their first choice, their votes are distributed. You continue that process until you're down to 2 or 3 candidates, and at some point, someone has an actual majority instead of a plurality. So that's the difference. I think ranked choice is great for single winner offices, and I think proportional is noticeably superior for legislative bodies.
Interesting. Well, just for your entertainment, we held in Western Massachusetts the first beer election last night. So
okay. All right.
We elected a Pilsner, I think it was.
Okay. An excellent choice.
I voted for Porter, though, so oh well.
But did you have Pilsner as one of your choices?
Yeah. Yeah, so we ranked it. There were 5 choices, and we ranked from 1 to 5.
I submitted a number of resolutions at the Democratic National Committee meeting in Atlanta, and the night before they were due, I was actually talking to Tom Perez on the phone, and I told him I had a resolution about the party supporting ballot initiatives, and he asked about the ballot initiatives, and I mentioned the one for ranked choice voting, and he mentioned that he knows Rob Ritchie at Fair Vote, and I mentioned that I knew Drew and Evan and Grace from Fair Vote, and he said, you should submit a resolution to use ranked choice voting in our DNC elections. And I said, Tom, I'd be happy to do that, and I did. Now, it was passed on to a committee to study. I don't know if any of you looked in on the party chair and the other officers that we elected. Nearly every office went multiple rounds of balloting. The election was supposed to be over in the meeting at 3 o'clock. I had a 10:40 flight and had to leave before we elected our vice chair, and I was far from the first one to leave. So the combination of the fact that Tom Perez is the new chair, and this was his idea, I think it might go through this time.
Nice.
So, but ranked choice voting would have made for a much shorter, the other term for it is instant runoff, because since you're counting second, third, fourth choices. And the point I wanted to make is this: we had 9 candidates for chair, and I liked all of them. I wanted to vote for all of them, but I wanted to vote for some more than others. And it occurred to me as I was leaving that day that if we had ranked choice voting, I could have cast a vote for every candidate that I liked. Now, some of them would have been my 5th, 6th, 7th choice, and they might not have been as happy as my 1st, 2nd, or 3rd choice. But it would have felt real good to get to vote for Pete Buttigieg and Tom Perez and Keith Ellison and Sally Boynton Brown and some of the others. It would have felt good to be able to cast a vote for 4 or 5 people.
Yeah, I definitely like that effect. Although one of the qualifiers on what we were doing was, I think you get successive rounds if no one gets 50 plus 1% on the first run.
Right. But ultimately you get to that, you get to someone with a majority And,
Mhm.
and they get there by everybody voting for them, even if they were their third choice or fourth choice. You don't have the situation like we've had all too often recently in the White House, where we have a minority president, where a majority of
Yep.
the people did not vote for them, even as a second or third or fourth choice, because they didn't have that opportunity.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I would like to take a few more questions. We have two people with their hands up, and that actually was the question I was going to ask, and I would like to give some information on that. Maybe someone who's got their hand raised will talk about that as well. I don't know, but we are doing research here in Take Back Elections that indicates that range and score or approval voting actually has better end results than ranked choice instant runoff voting. And I'd love to discuss that a little more as we go along, especially with the people who are trying to, move forward ranked choice voting. So at some point, we'll maybe have that discussion. We just find that some of the research done about it makes these other voting methods actually better than ranked choice voting, including the fact that hand counting is possible at all levels of races and at the polls, even before you close the polls, etc. So there's different things about it. But I do want to call right now on George Ripley. I promised he could speak next. And then after him, Jeffrey Dickler would like to ask a question. So George, Adria, are you able to unmute George? George, are you with us?
I think I'm unmuted.
There, great.
Hi, Winston. You're going to try and pass something in Missouri by the ballot initiative
Yes.
to promote proportional representation. That's a significant task, and I wonder if you could elaborate on your preparations for that. Also, what other states are attempting or are close to attempting such a thing?
As far as I know, no other states are thinking about this right now, and I hope that will change. I hope this call and Take Back Elections involvement will help change that. Like I said, we're much farther along here in Missouri. I actually started working on this proposal 2.5 years ago, 3 days after I lost my first race by 21 votes, when an estimated 300 to 400 Republicans voted for my Democratic opponent. And in retrospect, it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't think it was right for one party to choose the other party's candidate. And some of you may know our Senator Claire McCaskill, has been very proud of the fact that she helped choose Todd Akin as her opponent 5 years ago now. But we are trying some things very different here in Missouri. And I have to say, we started gathering signatures a week ago tonight, actually, and we've had several different models of events to try our ideas out in, and so far everything is working exactly as envisioned. And just a few pieces of that puzzle, we're certainly looking for organized groups to get involved. We have a petition for a renewable energy project, a Green New Deal for Missouri, and quite a few groups are lining up to support that. We have had some groups line up to support ranked choice voting, but and it certainly helps to have lots of organized groups putting their volunteers together and a little bit of their money behind the effort. Government by the people is designed, and as far as I know, this is unique. We are basically operating both the website and the organization as a hub for all of the other organizations that want to get involved in helping on one of the petitions or one or two of them, whatever combination they're interested in. We've actually got 9 approved so far. I anticipate we'll have 11 ultimately, but I think that'll come down to 2 or 3 or 4 that have clear support. I can tell you, and George, I'm guessing the rest of you around the country, if you've been to events since November the 8th, you've witnessed this as well. I don't think there's a better moment in time for this movement and for using ballot initiatives as a primary means of changing and reforming the system than we have right now. We were getting a very, very good response before November 8th. Since November 8th, there are new groups springing up all over Missouri with hundreds of cases, thousands of volunteers. People are showing up at town hall meetings and presentations and other events, and they are not there to listen, nod their head, and go home. They want to know, what can we do to change things? Where do we sign up to do it? And when can we start? And I've been so happy for the last 7, now 8 days to be able to say we can reform our government with ballot initiatives. You can sign up at governmentbythepeople.org and you can start immediately.
In your state. And I was, on the national level, there's Paul Jacobs and Senator Gravel. Did you reach out to the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center by any chance?
I hadn't even heard of that.
Well, we can do more on those things later because we do have another guest. And we also have one last question here, if we can keep it brief. So Jeffrey can take the floor with your question, and then we'll move on to our other presentation.
And George, let me just thank you for that, and I will follow up on that.
You're welcome. We'll be in touch, I hope.
Okay.
Yes, hello. I'm Jeff Dickler. I hope if you can't understand me, please let me know. My voice is kind of hoarse. About 3 weeks ago, Gary, we spoke on the phone. I'm here in St. Louis. My wife and I are in the process of trying to mount a legal challenge to the winner-take-all to change things to proportional voting. I applaud your efforts to use the ballot initiative, but I have to point out that Missouri is one of a small number of states that allows this, that we can use for doing, to do a ballot initiative to get something like this done. Would there be an interest in switching to a legal challenge for getting, to challenge the winner take all? Because if we can get it overturned on a constitutional basis, theoretically, then it would put all 48 states using it into an unconstitutional position, meaning that they would have to comply and switch to proportional voting nationwide. Is there a way we might be able to work together on this in some way?
It is unavoidable that we will have to do that in some way at some point. There is a 1967 law passed by Congress in response to people using ranked choice and proportional to discriminate against minorities. The 67 law requires election of members of Congress from single-member districts. It is my contention, and obviously you agree with me, that that is unconstitutional. That is an unconstitutional infringement on the rights of states to determine how they determine their representatives. There's a quote from The Economist from 1981 that says that the distortions in representation that occur with single winner districts and winner take all elections is so fundamentally flawed as to be undemocratic, and that single winner from winner take all should be thrown out on that basis alone. Now, there was an attempt in 1992 to overturn that law, to repeal it. Interestingly, among the co-signers was a young representative from Vermont by the name of Bernard Sanders. There needs to be another effort to overturn that. I intend to go ahead with our U.S. representative version of proportional because I believe that law is unconstitutional. And if we are challenged, as we almost certainly will be, that would be the type of case that you're talking about. So should we get this passed in Missouri or anywhere else, and certainly there's safety in numbers, if we get this passed in 15, 20, 23, 24 states, we're more likely to win that challenge. I also would note that marijuana is still illegal at the federal level, and yet 20-some states have now legalized it in some form. And technically, those states are in rebellion. And while I know marijuana is very important to many people, this may be a more consequential issue. But the court case that you're talking about will almost certainly happen. I think us getting it on the ballot and passed would give us a basis to win that case.
Well,
What's
thank
the name
you.
of that case?
I'm
What's
not,
the name of that law? The
Seven law. If you go to fairvote.org, it is up on their website.
Okay, so I would like to thank you for your presentation, and I know we did spend a lot of time trying to understand this. We know it's a ballot initiative moving forward as a single issue type of proposal, but we hope that everyone will keep an open mind to other options, because it would serve us well to make sure that we have the best things that we can put in place, especially as we're doing a lot of work through the ballot initiative and constitutions of state and federal and legal work on that basis as well. So I would like to ask everyone to stay open-minded to learn about another option. And the creator of this option is Jim Mueller. Jim, have I pronounced your last name correctly?
That works. Thank you.
And Jim is, he's earned his Juris Doctorate from the Wisconsin Law School. He also holds a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from the University of Wisconsin. He has been a State Senate Administrative Assistant and a Senate Committee Clerk, Town Supervisor, Administrator, Clerk, and Treasurer. So he's got a lot of experience in governance. Additionally, he was a Democratic candidate in the Wisconsin 57th Assembly District. And he got in 1976 with 46% and in 78 with 49% of the vote. So he was very widely supported. He's the former chair and the 1998 governor candidate for the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. So Jim himself is somewhat nonpartisan, I might say, or at least multi-party. Also, he is the founder of the Center for Direct Representation and an organization promoting direct representation as the alternative to winner-takes-all single representative district elections. He's retired from general law practice with special interest in election law, public records, and open meetings. And finally, he's also been the organizer of Wisconsin Counts Limited, an educational organization working for election integrity. And so, Jim, we're going to give you the floor to talk to us about what I think I understood to be called choice of representation and how it might be different from what we've just heard, and maybe some history and your thoughts on representation, if you would share tonight with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I call it choice of representation. I think Marcia suggested right to representation or right of representation might be better. We're still working to refine this. Basically, I start with, we have to have a principle. And the principle I'm starting with is that we all have an unalienable right to the representation of our choice. And I ask people, do you believe you have an unalienable right to the representation of your choice? I think that, the Declaration of Independence said we have life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I don't think we can obtain those things unless we have participation in government and voting, and then being outvoted by other people who are influenced by large money in a gerrymandered district. Just isn't my idea of being represented. We have a present situation because we're in winner-take-all elections, and as Dubochet, the French sociologist, advanced a law, Dubochet's law, that basically says anytime you have winner-takes-all, you come down to one or two dominant gangs, and that's what we're experiencing here. And if you applied our electoral rules to the marketplace, say the marketplace for beer, we would only have Miller and Budweiser. And if we've heard now from Mr. Winston that if you apply proportional representation, you might have 10 beers. Well, my system would give us the hundreds of beers that are out there. Because what I'm basically saying is that votes become proxies. Every vote, instead of being defeated by someone else's vote, every vote becomes a proxy and empowers the person that you've given that to. And so the way that would work, an example I like to bring up is like the Wisconsin legislature, 99 assembly seats, and they've refined the gerrymandering very precisely, and they used computers and they used a law firm to hide the process from the people. But what I would do is say, okay, if you want to be in the legislature, you go and take out nomination papers in one or more counties. You get votes in those counties. They give you a total, and you go to Madison, or you stay at home on a computer, and you get to vote. So if you get 1,000 votes, your vote counts 1,000. If you get 10,000 votes, you get 10,000. The difference between my system and the present system is that we no longer make representatives unfairly equal. And by that I mean the Madison area has some Democratic representatives who get 28,000 votes. And in the legislature, they get 1 vote. In other places of the state, there are people that get as few as 8,000 votes, and they are in the legislature and they get 1 vote. Then you have people who get 14,000 votes and they are considered to be defeated and they don't get any votes. Under my system, you get 28,000 votes, you vote for 28,000 people. You get 8,000 votes, you vote for 8,000 people. What this does is encourages a huge amount of competition. It encourages people to come forward. They're no longer being discouraged by saying, I can't possibly win. I don't have enough money to take on an incumbent and to get the 50% plus 1 that I need. It brings young people into the process. It gets independents in all the parties. I would think that in any reasonable size county in Wisconsin, after this proposal was adopted, you would see all the major parties, maybe multiple people from some of the bigger parties, as well as several independents. The nice thing about this system is that you don't have thresholds that will favor the major political parties. Winston mentioned 5.88% threshold to be able to get into the Senate in Missouri if his measure passes. Well, 5.88% for an independent is on a statewide basis is pretty high for a legislative seat. So that would act as a filter. I would get rid of that filter. Along with this, I'm saying that if a position is important enough to be elected, it's important enough to have broad representation of all the people. And to do that, you have to have multi-person positions. So you would have executive councils. And we see that in Switzerland, a democratic, free and peaceful and prosperous country. They assign their members based on party, though, whereas I would assign it on the number of votes they get. In this country, we had an executive council in Pennsylvania. The governor position was made up of a number of people. And when the revolutionary soldiers surrounded Philadelphia asking for their back pay, that council decided to diffuse the situation and told people they would eventually get paid. Alexander Hamilton, an authoritarian on the other part, said was very upset with the council that they didn't violently put down this uprising by soldiers who hadn't been paid. So I see anytime you have one person in a position, you have authoritarian aspects going on. And when you have one person, they may just lie you into a war. I know that's never happened, but it could. So, hi, Marcia. Thank you for getting me on here. So the part of what my proposal would do is eliminate the need for primaries. It would also be applicable to, in our case, the nonpartisan races of town boards, village and city councils, school boards, sanitary districts. All of that would be decided based on, how many votes you got. You would be on that council. Now, some people have asked me, gee, is that going to cost us more money? And I say, that doesn't have to. What you do is, if it costs $10 per voter in Wisconsin to have an assembly, then if you get 1,000 votes, you get $10,000 as your total salary and office allotment. You get 28,000 votes, you've got now $280,000. So you can hire staff and have an office. And I think it's entirely appropriate, because I've been involved in the uprising in Wisconsin. Started 6 years ago, and we've had people put in hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of hours on an unpaid basis trying to change the agenda of the regime that's in place. These people would love the opportunity to put their name on the ballot and advance their issues and actually get some money for it. So I've got hundreds of notes here, and I don't know what else. I think it would be best if I just threw them up into the questions. But it starts all with the declaration that we have an unalienable right to representation of our choice. You stop making the elected people equal, and you make the voters equal. Every voter gets the representation of their choice. You treat the elected representatives fairly, which means you give them the voting power and the salary and the benefits equal to how many people they're representing. It gets rid of the need of primaries. It applies also to nonpartisan races, and in partisan races, it eliminates the problem you have in the proportional representation, like Winston was telling us, where the parties are major players. And after what we saw this last presidential election with the treatment of Bernie Sanders, there's a huge number of people that are suspect of the major parties and who they really represent. I think with that, if I saw Gallup numbers saying 44% of the people independent, Winston mentioned about 42%. So most people are not into the two major parties, and the support for the Democrats and the Republicans is exaggerated by the fact that only under our present system, only Republicans and Democrats get elected, with a small exception of like Bernie Sanders. And I think there's one person in the U.S. Senate. There are no independents in the state of Wisconsin in our legislature. So we have a gross underrepresentation. This system would also get rid of districts completely. So, gerrymandering is not a question then, because we're getting rid of districts. And I point out to people who say, oh, let's go to nonpartisan districting like Iowa has. And I say, okay, Iowa registers their people. The plurality of the people registered as an independent, and then the Republicans and the Democrats. They have 4 congressional seats. The Republicans hold 3 of those seats. The Democrats hold 1. So, and the independents, who are the plurality of the people, I think almost 40%, do not have the representation of their choice. So this all starts with an unalienable right to have representation or a choice. It goes in line, I think, with the fact that we're moving forward. It once was acceptable to discriminate against people of color. It was permissible to discriminate against women, and now we're still discriminating against people that do not support the major elite candidate out there. And I think we could do away with that. We'll have much more participation. The voting rates will soar once everybody has an opportunity to vote for somebody that they really trust. And I think with that, I'll just open up the questions.
Well, Jim, that's a great presentation. I like a lot of what you're sharing, and I want to say that Marcia, I know you mentioned her in some kind of collaboration with you a little bit on this. And so, you know, I like a lot about what I'm hearing, and I'd like to see what Marcia might like to say about maybe some variations or anything else she would add to your presentation, which I don't, you know, I just would like to invite you, Marcia, if you would like to say a few things about this.
So, so very quickly, about 10 years ago, maybe more, I joined the Green Party. And here in North Carolina, getting onto the ballot is, you know, it's outrageous. So we had to collect, at that time, about 60,000 signatures. And then when Barack Obama won, it went up to 100,000 signatures. And that led me to start figuring out, okay, what's going on with this voting system? So I went online to many different organizations who were working on fixing voting, and I found that people were, and then Citizens United passed also, and then people were working on little pieces. Some people were working on the money part, some people were working on instant runoff voting at the time, which is now being called ranked choice voting. Some people were working on ballot access, and I thought, we need to make what you're doing right now a comprehensive change to specifically qualify what's going on with the voting. And I stumbled onto Jim's, it's not proportional, it's proxy representation. And what I liked about it was if you lose in an election, you have to wait 2 years before you're really represented and before you can vote again to be represented. And I like that there was no districts, that you could pick somebody from anywhere. And then there was someone else who was talking about the fact that we should be having at least one representative to 30,000 in population. So if you increase the number of representatives, you have a lot more opportunity to actually go and see your representative and talk to them, and also people who don't have a party. If you just happen to know somebody in the neighborhood who you think would be a good leader, you could just, the people in the neighborhood could just send that person to represent them. And I thought that also people who weren't in my party, like I'm on the left, people who are on the right or wherever in the spectrum, would also like this, because they too would not so-called lose. There would be no losers. Everybody would go, and at the table, then you do the way I understand him is, if I run and I get 1 million votes and somebody else runs and they get 988,000 votes, we're both at the table. But when the bills come through, I can put my 1 million for that bill, and they could put their 988,000 against that bill. But at least they were at the table to voice my views, or the views of those however many people were there represented. And I've been chasing him down to join all kinds of things that I like. I'm joining everything. And I get on the radio and I tell people about it, and I have to call him and say, get on the radio. So
he's doing a great job for me there.
I'm his cheerleader.
I want to mention, I was involved in election integrity after the 2011 Supreme Court race in the state of Wisconsin. It was clear that there's real flaws in our election system. And under the system I propose, well, under the present system, if you cheat in a close race and steal 2 percentage points of the vote, you can switch 100% of the power of that seat from one person to another. Under my system, if you cheat, if you create you do a felony to steal votes, and you move 2 percentage points of the vote, you've only moved 2 percentage of the power. And since the other people who all gotten votes are still involved in government and can launch investigations, they're more likely to find where that felony has occurred. And the same thing goes with money. In 2010, 4 of the 17 state Senate races were considered to be competitive. The money just flooded into those 4, virtually nothing went anywhere else. And by moving just a few percentage points of the votes, in this case, the Republicans picked up 3 of the 4, almost all 4 of the 4 seats that were competitive. Under my system, if someone spends millions and millions of dollars to move a couple percentage points of the vote, they've only gained a couple percentage points of the power, not a whole 100% of the power. So it takes care of the cheating in elections. It decimates the value of special interest spending. It totally eliminates gerrymandering. It will increase the participation by the people. Instead of forcing them to vote, they'll want to vote. It pretty much deals with all of the major issues that are out there. And if you can think of an issue you don't think I've dealt with on this, I'll be glad to consider it or even tell you what my take is on it.
Jim, this is Winston. If you don't mind a screen assist, I have a slide I can put up to illustrate one of your points.
That'd be great. You had lots of good materials there, and I'm way behind you. Technical capability here.
Well, one thing I really like about what Jim has just said, and of course I do think of at least one more problem, Jim, or maybe a couple, but it does address a lot of problems. And we still have the voting machines, however. So like you started out when we were chatting before we started the meeting, so there are still some issues. And thank you, Marcia, for the comprehensive view as well. So anyway, yes, how about the slide here?
That shows the problem. I mean, if you can corral a certain percentage of the vote and it is done in a certain way, you can pick up just over a majority of the seats, and the way it works, you get 100% of the power. I believe under a choice of representation system, with already the plurality, the people being favoring independents and third parties, and I expect the Republican and Democratic shares will go down dramatically when people realize that other people can win. You will not have one party with a plurality in charge. And what will happen is things will come around the issues. And the issue came up before marijuana. The majority of the people support delegalizing, or at least medical marijuana. But right now, if you want to do that, but you're also concerned about gun regulation or abortion or birth control or whatever, immigration, you might vote for somebody that's right wing and for those issues, and who is against you on these other issues. That's the other thing I expect. Right now, the 2 major parties we had for presidential, the 2 viable ones, I agreed with one on maybe 10% of the issues and the other 12% of the issues. I expect that what'll happen is that when this is in place, we'll see a multitude of candidates, and we'll say, oh, well, I agree with that one on 95%, but this one on 98%. So I'll go with the one I agree with on 98% of the time. The other thing, term limits. A lot of people are unhappy with representation because 97% of incumbents get reelected. And so a few years ago, it was pushed, oh, well, let's get them out of office by limiting their terms. What my system would do is give everybody the power to limit the representation by the person they chose. Because if you didn't like them, you voted for somebody else the next time. And now their power has been diminished incrementally, at least by your vote. But the thing is with that, you can't force somebody else to give up their representation, because there'll be some people that like the person you don't like. Everybody gets the representation or choice. It's kind of the golden rule applied to elections. I'll let you have the representation of your choice if you let me have the representation of my choice.
Yes. So I want to ask if there's any questions or comments for Jim on this concept. And
I'd like to know, Jim, if there's a place to go to get more information.
Thank you. Right now, I just have on Facebook choice of representation. I've been posting a lot of these ideas. I keep telling myself I got to pull it together in book form. I have investigated how to go forward with that, and thinking of calling it Common Sense 2.0 after time has changed approach. He got the people involved in the revolution, and later in that pamphlet, he said that new people in a new land would meet under the trees to make decisions, and when there's too many of them, then they would send representatives to government. Now, there's the definition of representative, I think, is somebody who's actually looking out for your interests and not the person who holds the political power of the district you live in. Two very different definitions for representation. I believe Thomas Paine was probably the first, meaning somebody is representing you, looking out for your interests. And so that's the approach I would take. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And another place to get more information,
Well, choice of representation, yes. Okay.
yeah, would
I
be
have
something.
some
I've looked at your links, but also we do talk about it on our Facebook group as well. And I just think it's good for us to investigate everything and make sure we have the best things going forward. So I don't know, does anyone else have any comments or questions? I did especially like the concept of that you pointed out that, you know, with this kind of method, it doesn't really pay people to cheat very well. I mean, they, you know, might get some marginal advantage, but not a great deal of advantage.
Yeah.
If we can fix the voting machines, of course. We're working on that. That's going to be our next week, and we already have some things on our archives about voting machines, source, and that kind of thing. So,
well, Monte, even with voting machines, I mean, we don't like them, but even with them, everybody knows how many. I mean, you could go back right now and look and see how many votes every person had and how much representation they would have had at the legislative table.
right.
I think we agreed to that separating the president from the legislative elections and the type of voting. We've already agreed that separating them is probably the best. The other thing, I wrote something called the Bill of Rights for Voting Equality, and I put Jim's choice of representation in that, and so I have some stuff on it too if that makes it easier. But
yeah, and I would like to say too, to your point, Marcia, that yes, as long as we trust whatever the tallies are on the voting machines, but you know, to some degree, certainly your point is valid. And also we do promote the hand counting, which is one of the reasons that we actually found that between that and other things, we prefer the ranked choice, or not the ranked choice, but we prefer the range and score method or an approval method, because we believe it actually has the end results of what people are being told that the ranked choice voting and the instant runoff voting has. But when you look at those two over time, they actually don't prove up. And I'm hoping that we'll all continue to do deeper and additional investigations to make sure that what we put forward is really the very best. Does anyone else have anything to offer or comment or questions?
Well, if you know, I know Rob Ritchie has been very successful in getting instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting implemented in various towns and cities around the country. Have range score and approval voting been equally accepted by cities around the country?
Well, George, they haven't been picked up by, I guess, who I might say some of the kind of more longer term election type organizations, and nobody knows for sure the reasons why. Some people have their thinking about maybe why, but when I know there's a really good site Marcia might have to help me with the name of it. Electology.org, I believe, is the name of it.
That's the website, and
Right.
the Center for Election Sciences.
Right. And
What's it
so
called? What's it called?
Center for Election Sciences. It's at
And-
electology.org.
right. And so, George, you need to know that in our working groups, we've been investigating all of these things, and we've been investigating, you know, certainly the gerrymandering, looking at the districts, looking at, you know, what some of the states are doing to make that better if you have districts, and looking at now options more specifically in the proportional representation idea. And we've been, and that's why we've invited these guests. And we've also been doing the same work in the voting method with the investigating the ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting versus these other methods. So the answer is it hasn't been, but it hasn't been picked up by, I guess, the leading election voices. And I would really question why not, because it's certainly able to be hand counted and actually ends up more bringing about the results in an election that some people believe that ranked choice voting will bring about. I hope that Bruce is on the phone. If you could elaborate or join us with the call, Bruce, if you might like to elaborate a little more, because you've been doing some study on that. And I don't know if you're willing to speak to that at all.
Sure. Can you hear okay?
A little louder. Can you turn your volume up?
Is that any better?
A little bit.
Okay.
I think we can hear you. Maybe just be close to your speaker. We can hear you, but it's just not super loud.
Is that better?
I think so. Let's try it.
Actually, I was talking to the camera instead of the microphone. So maybe I'll get closer over here to the microphone. Anyway, yeah, I picked this up pretty soon after I joined the Green Party last summer. I noticed that they were pushing the ranked choice voting, which I actually instant runoff is a better name for it, because ranked choice includes other methods like BORDA, so it's a more generalized term. And what I've seen promoted is mostly instant runoff voting. Actually, BORDA, I believe, is better than instant runoff voting, even though they're both ranked choice methods. Range is not a ranked choice method, and so it avoids some of the downfalls of all ranked choice methods in setting people up to have to vote against what they would prefer in order to get the outcome, the least negative outcome, as we've all seen with plurality voting, where, for instance, taking it back to 2000, people were told they were spoilers if they spoilers for Gore if they voted for Nader with the vote. Actually, it turns out that that didn't happen in that election, but potentially it could. And so people who vote strategically with plurality will not vote for their preferred candidate in many instances, because they're afraid that let's say they're voting on the left. If they vote for Nader, they'll deprive Gore of the office, and that can happen. So instant runoff voting has that same downfall, and it also penalizes third parties in certain instances where they'll appear to do better than they currently do under the plurality system, but when they get strong enough to actually challenge one of the major parties, then it has the same effect as plurality, and it hurts the third parties. With range voting, you actually have something called the nursery effect, where people realize that they can give other candidates decent votes, because, you know, there's a range of scores that you can give, and that.
Well, thank you for mentioning that. There is an explanation for these things, some different graphs that we'll be putting out in a comprehensive, essentially report on this, so that people who think that the ranked choice voting is the best method can look at that and kind of maybe connect a few more dots, as we've found we did in our investigations ourselves. And again, the electology.org is a good place to go to learn more about that. So I know that this has kind of been brought up because the ranked choice voting is one of the ways that people think we can moderate the outcomes in the presentations we've been talking about tonight. But with our research, while we haven't made an official conclusion, we're really close to making an official conclusion at this point, barring anything very greatly different, that range and score voting would actually have be a better voting method to give people the outcome that they believe they're getting with the ranked choice voting. And it also has the benefits that it can be hand counted. And because we believe that the voting machines need to be backed up by at least the ability and the actuality, in our case, of what we would prefer, to be able to have a hand count. So it can be hand counted with the ranked choice voting. You can really only hand count a local election, potentially, if it's small. And actually, you really can't even count a small local election if you count the way we think is best, which is to have small enough precincts that you can hand count there on the site before the ballots even leave that precinct, which helps with the chain of custody. But those are just a few pieces of commentary on both ranked choice voting, range, and score, and how they kind of overlap with these issues of proportional representation or choice of representation. Does anyone else have any more comments before we wind up our meeting?
Monta, I have a suggestion for Jim. I took a look while we were talking at his Facebook page. And
Yes.
Jim, I would recommend putting as succinct but thorough a description of your proposal as you can as a post on the page, and then pin it so it stays at the top.
Yeah, I thank you. I have not done that recently, so.
Okay, and I also have one more slide to share for a closing thought here. Let me get it up so everyone can see it. And Benjamin Franklin could not be here with us tonight, but we'll bring him in by remote control. There's a lot of excellent, obviously some very smart people on this call who have studied this issue deeply and have a lot of ideas that we can debate endlessly. I believe that we are at a moment right now of unique opportunity with all of the people looking for something to do and wanting to engage in some constructive activity. I was disappointed to find there were a couple technical problems with my proposals for proportional representation, and I had to resubmit them or they would already have been approved. I want to strike while the iron is hot, and I don't have a slide for don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But I think at this point, we need to get some ballot initiatives submitted, whether it's similar to mine or similar to Jim's or something else. We need these things in the works in 24 states as soon as possible so people can go to work on them and we can actually get something done instead of debating it endlessly.
And Winston, that's exactly what we're hoping to do. We're very young, but at the same time, we have a goal of getting our language ready for the summer ballot signature collecting period. So we're planning to, move it forward as well, and maybe we can collaborate some way.
Sounds great. And I can't find my cursor to get up to stop sharing.
Well, Monta, I just wanted to suggest also that don't discount the fact that some states don't have initiatives. We have people like Reverend Barber, who's working on repairing the breach thing regarding restoring the Voting Rights Act. And if you just get enough people in the street, like we did for the Women's March, and we have our document that we're supporting, that would be a lot as well.
And thank you for mentioning that, Marcia. I have tried to make sure, at least in my introductions, about that we do mention friendly legislators, or in your case, even unfriendly ones with a lot of public pressure. Right. So we certainly won't leave you to yourselves. We'll try to help over there in North Carolina, but at the very least, if we can win a lot of states with the ballot initiatives and the friendlier legislators, we think we can ultimately help North Carolina and all the rest of the states that might have a little more uphill road. But certainly I appreciate you joining our group and hoping to continue working together, and maybe we can together hammer out something and get it out there on time.
I have a question for Jim.
Yes, who is this? A question for Jim?
Okay.
I'm sorry that I got in late. I attempted to get in on time, but my computer didn't respond. I missed most of your presentation.
We can't hardly hear you. Please speak louder.
I missed most of Jim's presentation. Is that any better?
A little.
I can hear you.
Okay. If you have the choice of representation, you still have to elect people from your 300 or 30,000 area, right? Or am I totally lost here?
Elections in Wisconsin, I imagine a lot of other states are administered at the county level. And my proposal would say if you want to be in the legislature or a statewide office, you would register in a number of counties. You get your name on the number of counties. The well-financed, well-known candidates on many counties. People who don't have much will be on one, maybe two counties. And so that's how people would get on the ballot. That's how they get their votes. And each vote would empower them, give them additional voting power in the office, and also additional compensation, which do both on a directly proportional relationship.
So you still would be electing these people, and you would still need a method of voting in order to do that.
Oh yeah, people are on the ballot, and then voters show up and indicate who their president is. In this case, what used to be a weak disposable vote is now a strong a proxy, basically.
Right.
A continuing transfer of power from the voter to their representative to represent them during the next term.
I guess my question was based on what you typed, that all of the voting systems other than choice of representation deny some, if not most people, of their first choice.
Yes.
And I would say, yes, that's true, regardless of whether we have the choice of representation or not. And so we still have the issue of what is the best of selecting, the representatives that we end up with at the county level.
What's the best method? I mean, we could require people to send in a letter and say, I want this person to represent me. But I think there is real value to having the secret vote, the private vote, and then there would be less repercussions. Now, in Wisconsin, when there was a recall of Scott Walker, everyone's name was disclosed by a right-wing group that put it out there, and we've heard many stories of people who think that their advancement in their careers has been truncated by people who know that they were politically on the other side of the fence. So we still, I'm not advocating that we do away with the whole voting process. I think that's still very important to protect the voters. I just want to make sure that also the votes are counted correctly, which is another issue.
Right. So I just wanted to clarify that you and I are on the same side of this. That it's two factors that are both important to taking back elections.
Oh yes, and there's lots of factors, but we'll work on all of them.
Can I suggest that we use the Facebook page and the website to hash these out and ask more questions and things?
Certainly. Well, that's the point. Yes, that's absolutely the point. In between our meetings, we can carry on these conversations in the Facebook groups, and actually also on our website as well. We have comments at the bottom of each of the different pages, and so there's a lot of opportunity to give your feedback and input. I do want to say that I see that the range score choice of voting fits really perfectly with any system, really, but certainly the representation system that has been put forth here today. And I just think that voting, that style of voting, the style of choosing and voting would really complement either of those systems. And we can certainly continue this discussion in the Take Back Elections Facebook group.
Could I have a moment? You know, I obviously there's a sense of great urgency and a great sense that the iron is hot now. And I don't think it's going to cool off for quite some time either. But I wanted to, you know, we only have the ballot initiative in 24 states in the District of Columbia. It's not as if we're going to have ballot initiatives everywhere, but people everywhere are interested. And what's really going to make the difference when push comes to shove finally is a movement, a strong movement. Now, consider that the environmental movement as we know it in the United States, perhaps spear-pointed by the Sierra Club, which is huge. The environmental movement is huge. The labor movement is huge. The education and healthcare movements are huge. And every single one of them is affected by a strong electoral process or the lack of it. So the potential for building a huge unified national movement is huge. And
good point.
Can I address that?
And I think that in the process of building the ballot initiatives, which I have some experience with, having worked with Senator Mike Gravel for a long time, and knowing some of the other players in that game, I know how expensive it is. I know how difficult it is. You're not guaranteed to win, yet there is urgency. We don't want to burn people out, but we do want to build this movement. So anything, you know, and we may have great fortune in the various states that do try things. We might have great success, and we might have great frustration. But overall, we really need to build this concept of a unified national movement. Now, one thing that does make me wonder is whether there will be a single entity that becomes the spearhead for such a movement. Common Cause, of course, has been around for years. League of Women Voters has been around for years. They're very well-established institutions. They take a long time to make decisions. You know, I'm not sure that we shouldn't, you know, obviously 1,000 flowers will bloom. But on the other hand, we do need some consistency throughout this movement if we're going to consider ourselves a unified effort. And so I just wanted to plant those seeds.
Thank you, George. And that's one of the reasons we have the comprehensive approach. Not only is it necessary, but it's a great way to bring many people together because their piece of it is addressed, hopefully in a way that they will like, if not their, you know, again, the enemy of the perfect, you know, maybe it's not everyone's exact I and T dotted and crossed, but it's something that they say, yes, that was well thought out. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yes, maybe I like this a tiny bit better, but maybe I actually like yours better now that I really thought about it more and didn't know about it before. But as long as it's, you know, kind of in the very well thought out, and we can show and explain how well thought out it is, and get it there on time too, then I think that we have a good chance at building a large movement and bringing in other people that are supporting aspects of this, whatever various aspects, because of the comprehensive.
And also to point out that this movement has to be sustained. You know, 15 years from now, we have to look back and say that, you know, that we're still strong and we're growing. You know, we're still very strong in our oversight of the electoral process throughout the country and consistently making adjustments and improvements, because the corporate attorneys and the cheaters, the chiselers that are undermining the foundation of our democracy at every chance they get, making it harder, for example, to run ballot initiatives such as they're trying to do in Arizona right now. And, you know, asking for more signatures or a shorter period of time to get them, or special type of paper or whatever. They're always trying to make it harder to have a democracy. So this movement that we're trying to build, this has to become a fundamental part of our nation. This movement is something that has to be all-encompassing and huge.
And actually, in some of our language, two things. We are looking at, I guess, really requirements like election duty becoming like jury duty. So in a way, when you have to serve more, and then holidays, the national holiday, and, you know, the expectation is that you vote, you don't go party. So there are these things that we hope will kind of feed into what you're saying, that it kind of just becomes a way that we are. But yes, we do. But the other piece to that is we have language that we're writing that's going to make it very hard for the legislators to do like they're doing in Arizona and like they have done in Missouri and maybe many of the ballot initiative states. If our ballot initiative passes, it will have pieces in it that will make that very, very much more hard to do and much easier for the people to challenge if they try. So I think we have a very good overall, and we just need to take it over the finish line and get it out collecting signatures, and that's what we're in the process of doing. So thank you all for being on this evening. Thanks tremendously to both of our presenters. Winston, thank you, and Jim, thank you. And Marcia, thanks for kind of tag teaming with Jim a little bit there. And thanks everyone for being on. And we hope that...
Before we close out, could I run back to something George said very quickly?
Certainly.
You mentioned a movement, and it needs to be broad and inclusive. Mm-hmm. And there is a poll online that was done by GBA Strategies for the Progressive Institute. It's called the Poll of Likely 2016 Voters. It was done in January of 2015. And it took all these progressive issues and showed that the support is 80 to 90% among Democrats for nearly all these issues, roughly 2/3 of independent voters, and half of Republican voters. And this is pretty much everything Bernie was talking about. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's the basis for this sort of broad, inclusive movement. But right. One of the things we're fighting against is the bitter partisanship. The media loves conflict. It drives ratings. And the parties are fine with us having a fake choice between two parties that are both dominated to some extent by corporate interest. The people have got to unite and move beyond that. And we've got to be much more inclined to look for areas of agreement and much less inclined to let disagreement on one or two issues stop us from joining hands and working together to get a government of, by, and for the people.
Great. And I appreciate
that's what I was trying to do with the concept that we all have an unalienable right to the representation of our choice.
And
we can all
I'm
agree
looking
upon
forward to
that.
learning more about your idea. I'm very intrigued by it.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you two get yourselves together, and maybe you'll listen to us about the range, choice, and score, because those things are, we've done some very good research, and we believe we can deliver in time, and we think we if people just stop and listen, they're going to say, well, yeah,
Right.
So thank you so much, really, both of you, and all of the callers and participants, and thank you very much. I think that we all want the same things, and I think we can find a good way to get us there and bring a lot of unity and build that movement. And I just invite you to join our Facebook group, Take Back Elections on Facebook, and our website, takebackelections.org. We're working on a t-shirt ourselves, Winston.
Okay. And I joined your group, and I joined Jim while we were talking tonight. I joined Jim's group.
Well, great. And
Manta,
yes, go ahead.
Do you have these Zoom is such a wonderful system. Do you have these conference calls throughout the week?
What we mostly do is have larger group reports, information, whatever, like our meetings. Sometimes we have outside guests. Sometimes we have our own internal kind of presentations. But we mostly just have these on Tuesdays. Sometimes it's almost every Tuesday in a month. Sometimes it might be a couple of Tuesdays a month, but at least that. And so next week we plan to talk about ballot imaging, but we actually do have people working in small groups that you might have missed it, but with the gerrymandering one that we did before, which was sort of like kind of an educational, let's just sort of open the door to this topic for our group. We did, along with that one, have the voters issues group give a report on kind of some of the things they were doing. So if you look at in the archives, anyone who's interested to go look at our previous online meetings, you can get more information. Plus, you can always comment. You can message me anytime. You can comment on the Facebook group, and we have comments at the bottom of all of our pages except the home page for our website. We're still working on that, but it's coming along, and so we're trying to make sure there's plenty of ways for people to be in touch with us. But we don't have these with our large group more than a couple of times, 2 to 3. Some months we've had them every Tuesday, but it's every Tuesday evening. Well, several Tuesday evenings a month. Some of us in our working groups work by phone, or we have chat groups, we have different things, but we're looking at everyone's information constantly and taking that into account as we're trying to get more things ready for you to look at. And you're welcome to, make sure your comments are heard at the pinned post on the Facebook group. Pinned comments there. We comb through that as well. And so I just want to thank everyone. If anyone else has any remarks, I don't want to cut anyone off, but if we're all good here, that concludes sharing on this topic and trying to find a good solution here. Looks like we might be headed in a good direction.
And thank you for doing this, Manta.
Yeah, and thank you to Winston and Jim for your work, your background work on these things, and your presentations to us tonight, and everyone else who is still with us on the call or who was here earlier. I know we had over 20 people earlier, but And most of them stayed on through most of the call. So they can hear we're winding up, I know. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you another time.
Thank you.
Another Tuesday. Next week, actually.
Thank you, Monta.
You're welcome. Next Tuesday, we're going to have John Brakey on and Ray Lutz with their ballot imaging. I forgot again to ask people who were calling with the area codes, but most people have their names, I think. Yeah. But I did remember a little bit at the very beginning. I was going to mention it again.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks for being on, and I will get back with you. Just haven't had a chance today.
Oh, yeah, fine.
So didn't have a chance to get to you before the call.
Right,
Had a lot of irons in the fire to make everything happen.
I assume. Okay, good night.
And I will get back with you, though. Thanks,
Good.
George. And thanks for all your comments.
Mm-hmm.
Very helpful.
Hi. You okay?
Oh, I have a headache, a really bad headache,
Can I
actually.
stop recording now?
Oh, please. Yeah, please do.
Okay.